Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Down Roll. That's right, we're still making these.
That's true.
Or maybe you're watching them. So today we are going to talk about what role-playing system should I play?
What
Which
is
is the right
best?
one for me?
Yeah, exactly. It's an important question.
Yeah, it's the matching game today here on the Down Roll.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
So how do I, as a consumer,
hmm hmm
know what games I should even consider playing? Where should I start, Will.DM?
Well, first of all, I think it's safe to say majority of people out there, not all, because there's plenty of stories of people that don't. They get their first taste of role playing by playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
It's the number one thing out there. So that's what they know. That's what they go with, and they feel, hey, this is for me. Now, there's people that start playing role playing games and they're like, it's okay.
Who the
It's,
fuck would say
you know,
that?
well, somebody who's into something that's different than Dungeons
What?
and Dragons. This is true. So,
I
you
don't know
know,
if I'm okay with different, but let's talk about what else could be out there.
so there is a ton of different things, but that's the important part. Is like, say you start playing Dungeons and Dragons and you're enjoying the role playing, you're enjoying the aspect of it, but swinging swords at kobolds and goblins, it doesn't really excite you really that much. So what should you do? And this is an industry where there's literally a game for everybody. I mean, keep in mind that they've been making role playing games. I think the second role playing game came out in '76. It was really close on the heels after D&D.
So let's
And
say I want to play a game where I could be a bear detective who walks around in underpants and a tweed jacket. Like
you
that's
could
the kind of game I want to play. Is there something for me? Because that doesn't sound like Dungeons and Dragons.
for one, it sure as hell doesn't sound like Dungeons and Dragons at all. You've got that correct. But yes, actually, there is. And I think the first thing anybody who's looking to play expand out, play different games,
Mm.
the first thing you have
Maybe I
to
went too far with that example.
No, that's a good example because the first thing that comes to mind for me is Palladium Books had a series of books based off the Ninja Turtles. And part of it was anamorphic. They had all kinds of rules for playing anamorphic characters, tons.
Hmm. So
So
there you go.
there you go. There's one, and there's others. That's not the only one. Like a lot of people start gaming, you game with your friends,
Hmm.
which is awesome. In person role playing, there's nothing better. But nowadays, if you have a niche type of desire, like a bear that wears tweed suits,
And it
and that's
is
your thing,
it is a desire.
then you can go, and there is a number of virtual tabletop settings nowadays where you can go and you can find the type of people you want. So don't feel that you have to be stereotyped into just what your group's playing.
And that's a good point because with the technology nowadays,
Mhm.
instead of just having you hoping that you have other friends that will also like Dungeons and Dragons or whatever role-playing game you're going to play.
Right.
Now, over the internet, you can play with your mortal enemy like I do.
That's true. I think he's talking about me.
I'm talking about you.
You like we'll just say, for example, we'll go away from the bear. I'm sorry, but say like you're a big anime head. I mean, you're a manga and you're an anime head, and you just dig all up on that. That's your groove. Well, guess what? There's role playing games specifically designed out there for that. The first one that comes to mind for me, and I'm pretty sure it's still. I'm going to show my age if anybody who watches this knows what I'm
We
talking
can already
about.
tell you're old.
I know that's true. It's called Big Eye Small Mouth. It was a role playing game that was designed specifically to. Yep, you heard it right. Big
That's
eyes.
even kinkier than my bear shit.
But it's designed specifically to bring the flavor of anime into a role playing game, and that's what you do. The first thing you're going to do is go and find what your interests are outside of role playing. What kind of books do you read? What kind of shows do you watch on TV? Are you a big cop drama? Is that like your jam?
Yeah,
What's
maybe
that
you like
one show
detective
that?
stories.
Yeah, what's that one show that's been on forever and they got the jun jun? Law and Order.
Law and
That's it.
Order. Yeah.
Like if Law and Order is your bag, you love it. Guess what? There's police role playing games out there too.
What about science fiction?
Again, science fiction is probably the easiest one to find different types of role playing games. I mean, if you're a big hard science
This is
fiction
turning
kind of,
into a weird episode. I'm
I
getting
think
uncomfortable. We should have a disclaimer before this.
it's turning into a weird one for you. It seems when I say certain catchwords, Adam gets excited.
I heard role playing before we went live, and I took a weird turn.
That's right. But there's Traveler, and Traveler's been around forever, and Traveler's like one of the earliest games. I mean, there's been a number
What
of
about like
editions.
Rifts? I've heard of Rifts.
Rifts is now here we're going back to Palladium, and Palladium they're not as big as they used to be.
It's like a
It's a manufacturer. It's like Wizards of the Coast. Palladium
Palladio, if you'd like to be a sponsor.
Right? They were really big in the 90s. Really big. And that's who originally came up with Rifts. And Rifts was the catch-all system. Is basically there's all these different dimension portholes that go to all these different areas and worlds that do anything you want. There was two really big producers of games that produced like tons of all kinds of shit. GURPS and Palladium.
What is GURPS? I've heard the word GURPS, but it sounds
It stands for something.
terrible.
It's generic universal role-playing system.
And that was the best they could come up with.
Hey man, you got to go talk to Steve Jackson about that. They didn't bring me in on that meeting. I would have probably voted against it. But
it's like, so what should we call our new role-playing system? That's it. That's the best. No one else has an idea.
You know exactly what it was. It was the one guy in the corner. Well, saying how it's a generic and a universal system, why don't we just call it the generic universal role-playing system?
And someone should have stood up at that conference table and said, "Shut up, nerd!"
Yeah,
but no one did because they were all
they might
nerds.
have. You
they
don't
were
know.
all nerds. That's why they were coming up with a system to begin with.
Exactly. But that's the thing
wrong with that.
When you're looking for something, and this is why I say the whole topic was brought up to begin with, is it's important to find what you like and then role play that. Don't think that you have to just play. And the reason this is even a topic right now is because D&D has blown up, and D&D retro clones and the fantasy genre as a whole has been what's blown up. And granted, there's a lot of revival in a lot of different areas, but the whole idea of role playing now it's just wrapped up with D&D.
Well,
and all these new
when
players.
Most people think of role playing, unless they're like me and they think of dressing up in leather,
right?
They usually think of fantasy role-playing games.
They do, because it's synonymous with it,
right? Because D&D, even in its days when it wasn't as popular, was always the most popular.
Correct.
And got the most headlines.
Well, they have that whole saying, the world's most the world's most popular role-playing game. That's their tagline now.
Right.
And it's true. It's Dungeons and Dragons because they're the founder. But don't ever think that there's not a role-playing game out there for whatever interest you might have. Because believe me, somebody's made it. It's totally true.
Now, beyond just different genres, another thing that either attracts people or deters people from playing a game like Dungeons and Dragons is often the rules. So I have a friend, and we were talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and she had said, well, I've always wanted to play that, but I'm afraid of the math.
Yes.
So what happens if you do legitimately have a fear of math?
Well, and see, this is another thing. When you're going into different types of rules, there's different types of, here's another thing. Like, if you look at Dungeons and Dragons and you're like, oh, man, I don't like all those rules. What you need is, there's a term, it's called rules light. And there are tons of games, and it is a very big thing in the industry now. fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, we'll even go back and use them as an example. Fifth editions is a streamlined version of earlier editions.
Oh yeah.
Cherry picked of the good rules, then brought in, and then they've taken these different types of rules. The advantage and disadvantage system that is in fifth edition now, where you roll 2 dice and take the better, or roll 2 dice and take the worse, replaces all these years previously of, well, I get 2 here, I get a +3 there, so, and then you're adding all.
Shut up, nerd.
Yeah, you're crunching numbers, and that's the other term that's really prolific. It's called how crunchy.
Right, and I've heard this before, and I'm assuming that the person who came up with the term crunchy is also the one who came up with the term GURPS.
Probably. Well, it's crunching numbers. That's what it comes from.
I get it. It's just crunchy.
So
if someone says to me, "Hey, do you love crunchy role playing?" I'm gonna back away slowly.
Or yeah, well, depends. It could be me asking you, and then it'd be
then I would run. Right. Then I would just I wouldn't even look back.
That's one thing that you need to take into consideration when you're considering your game as well. It's like, how much rules do you want? Some people are really big on the rules, really tight on the rules. They want rules that they don't want to let anything up to chance. They're like, look, it says in the book here, this is what you do. Those are the crunchy games, and that's a game like Pathfinder. Pathfinder has, they've got all the rules you could ever want for whatever situation. And there's some people that really dig on that. They like the taking of the rules and seeing how they can make it work for their character, and they're really big into it. And there's some people that just hate rules.
Right. Those are like, I want man, not mine.
I want as few rules as possible. And what you want to go for then is you want rules light. You want something that incorporates as little, like you were saying, math, and has a streamlined rule set where a lot of what ends up happening is left up to interpretation. There was actually a game. It was the Amber Diceless game. It was about the Roger Zelazny's series of books, Amber. First one is Prince and Amber.
Oh, sure.
There's some people who are going to watch this, going to go, awesome book, and shame on you for not having read it.
Yeah,
but
love it. One of my favorites.
And that one, it was a diceless role playing game, and it was a role playing game designed for. That was like the epitome of let's have as less crunch as possible.
It's just, it's like the diceless role playing game is, the old Upright Citizens Brigade skit. What are you? I'm a hornless unicorn. Like, well, no, you're just a horse if you don't have the horn. No, I'm a hornless unicorn. So a diceless RPG,
you can't even wrap your head around that.
It's like rules. Yeah, it's like it's something else altogether. A hornless unicorn.
And there were some rules. There was a Prince Valiant role playing game also that came out in the 90s, and they used a D2. Could you imagine?
Is that a coin? Physical.
It was a coin. That's how you did. That's how you played.
How did they get
game.
away calling it a D2?
Because there's 2 sides.
Right, but you don't even need it. You flip a coin.
Well, yeah, they say that in the book too.
I don't even have a coin.
Now it's called a D2 because online you can do with those virtual tabletops. You go / roll 1D2.
Shut up, nerd. So now, what are the benefits of a crunchy system and a light rules system?
Okay, well, the benefits of
light, I suppose,
of a crunchy system is that if you're playing with people, or you are a type of person that is not good with off the cuff and just making it up,
you can't think for yourself, is what you're trying to say.
Well, that's a rude way of saying it, but sure, you could do that. But if you need concrete things, there's people out there that, they have to have it in the book. They have to have a rule. And they want somebody to lay it out for them.
Mm-hmm.
These are people who are really analytical mostly.
Sure.
And so
they're looking more at the strategy part of the game.
Yeah, and it just makes more sense to them. You know what I mean? And then you have the freewheeling hippie types like yourself,
the loosey goosey,
who don't want to be restrained by rules, man. You know,
Just do what you want.
yeah, you want the freedom to interpret it to go this way. People who are into crunchy, mostly, not all, and I'm not going to go off on a complete say that everybody like is like this or like that, but those are the type of people that they're the like to show me how it happened. I need to see the point A to point B to point C. Whereas the people who gravitate more towards the rules light, they're like if the game master says okay, and then this happens, they're not, well, how did it happen? They're more like, okay, and now what? You know, and
Mhm.
so you know, and coming to know how you prefer your role playing is going to gravitate you towards what system you like more.
And I think that's an important piece of it because I don't think that one necessarily dictates the other. So you can have a crunchy system and still be big into role playing, and you can have a rules
Totally.
light system and still be into role playing.
Totally. It's just how you want your rules packaged for your
Mhm.
story. I mean, you can get role playing out of anything. So, I mean,
That's the
you don't
spirit.
technically you don't need books at all to role play. I mean, that's the
Well,
key.
you just blew my mind.
One of the things, this is an actual quote, and I'm going to mess it up to an extent. It's either Tim Kask was saying. Now, Tim Kask was the first employee of TSR. He was the guy who became the editor of Dragon magazine and so forth and so on. And Gary Gygax.
One day we're gonna do a show just about how do you know this shit.
It's called reading. There's these things called books.
All right, I've already lost interest.
There you go. And I'm pretty sure it's between the two of them, but in the story, it's, we're really going to, or I think it's, let's just hope that they never figure out that they don't need our rules to role play, tongue in cheek in
Right.
regards to their own product, which is totally true. The rules are there for the mechanics of it.
Mm-hmm.
The role play you can do in a bedroom.
Right. With your bear and your leather suit. So now, where would you say that Dungeons and Dragons 5e, since it's so popular right now, where does that fall along the spectrum of crunchy to light?
5e, in my
And
opinion,
why not call it crunchy or smooth like you would a peanut butter?
you think, right? But
That, the fucking GURPS.
yeah.
All right, sorry.
You
Where
always
would you
come back to
find
Kirk.
5e along that
And
spectrum?
Steve, if you ever, Mr. Jackson, if you ever see this, I apologize for Adam. um,
I'm
in
sure he's a
my,
regular fan.
oh yeah, in my opinion, 5e pretty much falls in the middle because you have to understand earlier incarnations of Dungeons and Dragons were very crunchy games.
Mm-hmm.
Even fourth edition, the edition
But just
just pre,
nobody played.
yeah, for the most part, and so even even though they lightened it up, by lightening it up, it's still not a rules light game. Like a lot of rules light games have like you okay, I'm going to attack you, and there's one roll, and then that's it. And the one roll decides if you hit, and then you automatically determine how much damage. And all that happens off of one roll in a lot of different games. So
For
it's
those of you who
definitely
have
in
a
the.
dice fetish, you probably don't want that system.
You probably want a very crunchy system.
Yeah, because you got to roll all sorts of things.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty much.
Roll it out.
Roll up.
All right, so our and I don't even know what this means, but let's talk about first what this means. What is a retro clone?
Retro clones. Okay. Now we're talking about this is the Renaissance as well as the I don't even know what you want to call the damn explosion of role playing in Dungeons and Dragons right now. It's now in a phenomenon, but at the same time we have a renaissance of there's people who are going back to all these old games because like I said, first D&D 1974, pretty sure it's Tunnels and Trolls that's coming out in like 76, I could be wrong, and right around in 76 then you also got like Traveler drop in and all this different. So you've got what 40 some odd years of role-playing games that have been produced. Okay, there's a shit ton of games out there. So what people are doing is they're going back to these old games that they loved and played in the past, and they're taking them and they're modernizing them. And what they're doing is, a lot of what they do in the modernizing is they streamline them, or they change the crunchiness, and they kind of work out some of the stuff that didn't really make so much sense. A
So
real good
who is
example,
doing this? Just people?
tons of people.
Companies? Like, are
There's
these available
yes.
for purchase? Are
Yes.
they on?
You have the black hack, you have the white hack, you have Blue Home, you have God, what was
You
the
have the red rose. You have the purple rose of Cairo.
you have
The chartreuse whale.
Swords and Wizardry, you have Castles and Crusaders, you have adventure, Amazing Adventures. I mean, there is a ton. And what they're doing is they're going back into all these games that are out there. Okay, have been out there for a long time. They're taking those rule sets and they're reworking them, and they're streamlining them. They're making them, I wouldn't want to say better, but they're making them, because more in line, modern role playing games are, as a rule, generally not crunchy.
Mm-hmm.
Older the game is, the more crunchy it is. Not all, but as a general rule of thumb.
So
A
they're
good
decrunching a lot of old systems.
Correct. And they're keeping all the stuff that was really cool about it, especially the feel. Like, here's a really good example. A lot of the ones that are gone through and have they're making retro clones of the old D&D. Okay. Old D&D used to have, when you're talking the BX and those type of editions, which is BX is basic and expert. You starting to follow me? That's it's called BXE whatever. I can't think of it. I have to look at it. In those older editions, so these are the subsequent editions that come along from original D&D. So we're not talking advanced. They're talking about the editions of the original game, which then become basic D&D, expert D&D, champion, and Eternals or whatever.
Okay.
And so those ones there, when it first came out, your level caps were like 8, 9, and then it went up to like 12. And so, and those games, something else too, it's like those games were really deadly games for characters. So what they're doing is they're taking those rules, they're modernizing them to an extent, and they're keeping the flavor of them. Now there's even more games available and out there. If you like horror, there's Call of Cthulhu. There's a ton of other. There's one called Black Ship or Mothership, which is based off of the Black Hack, which is based off of basic D&D, and it's all about horror in space. I mean, whatever your kick is, man, it's out there. There was a.
What if you like love stories?
I will put. I can't name one off the top of my head, but I will put hard money down that there is a romance role playing game.
Fantasy, not fantasy. Family sitcoms.
Now you might be stretching it, but there's something out there that, let's put it this way, there's something for. There was a game called Toon. Are you familiar with Toon?
No.
And Toon was allowed you to play essentially the Warner Brothers cartoons.
Okay. Superheroes they've had.
There's
there was
tons
a
of
DC game. There was a Marvel game.
Yes. And that's another one of the earlier incarnations. I think the first superhero role-playing game comes out in 1977, and it piggybacks off of original D&D. It uses their rules, and then they just expand on it.
So now, are these retro clones even worth looking into?
Yes, 100% they're worth looking into, especially if you're somebody, one, who is an older gamer, and you're consider yourself like a grognard, maybe grognard second generation.
Talk
or
about
something
what
like
the
that.
fuck a grognard is.
Okay, a grognard.
You say it all the time.
Yes, I do. Okay, what a grognard is the terminology that is used to define somebody who is old school role player. I've been in the role-playing industry for a long time. It comes from Napoleon and Napoleon's army. The nickname of the old guard that was his elite troops, they were called grognards. And this even goes back further, and it shows the military wargaming roots of role-playing games. And so because they take that term from even there to describe old school role players, they're grognards. But you will like a lot of these retro clones because it's familiar. It's territory you've been,
If you're
and
old.
it's well, if you're old, yes. Like
What about for like newer players
now,
and younger players? Is it
now
worth it for
newer
them?
players, whereas the older guys are going to like it because they're familiar with the games and it's got a revamped rules system that
Right. It
they're
makes it
more
easier to play because the older
yeah,
you get,
because
your memory goes and you don't know how to play all these crunchy
well, and
rules.
to be honest, newer games with that much experience of of over 40 years of role playing
They're bound to improve.
they have improved. Okay. Now if you're a newer player and you're into again, this goes back to what everybody is just familiar with. If you find the high fantasy because that is what standard D&D is. It's
Right.
high fantasy. If you find that just not quite your cup of tea. It's just you don't really care for it so much. You want something more like the Conan books that you read or the comics that you something along these lines. You going into these retro clones and going back into
Or I
these
would say for
games.
the younger folks, like a Game of Thrones type game.
That's a great example.
Right.
Great
Because I'm trying to
example.
keep it to the skew to the younger audience.
Right. And well, I'm a good nerd. And so, yeah, that's a really good example. If those retro clones are really good for that. And here's a great example. If you want to play a game that's sort of like Game of Thrones, you go and you pick up a role playing game like low fantasy gaming.
Hmm.
That's a great one that you can.
I'll tell you what, not so creative in the title, but very descriptive.
Oh, but the rules are fantastic, and that is a really good example of taking the old school feel and the rule system. This isn't even a retro clone, really, because it's not based on the bones of an earlier edition. I mean, sort of D&D it is, but it's pretty much new type of way of looking at making rules, and that's a great way you can do it. You can have something where combat's a little more deadly. Things are a little more serious. If that's more your vibe, man, then a lot of these retro clones are along those lines and you'll dig on that.
So we've determined that unless you want to play Seinfeld the RPG, there's pretty much anything else out there for you.
Yes.
Now, where do I find groups?
Seinfeld?
Right. Well, I know where to find Seinfeld. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I've got the DVD box set.
I know you do.
How do you find groups for these games? Like I want to play something new. I want to stop playing D&D with you, Will, is what I'm saying, and I want to play something different and something new.
Okay, number one thing.
Or I just want to find a different group to play D&D with.
I've said this a lot recently, and I think the number one thing that doesn't get enough credit for the boom in popularity of tabletop role playing is the virtual tabletop. Everybody, the first thing anybody ever says, Critical Role, which that's valid to an extent. But the number one thing that made it the powerhouse it is, in my opinion, now is the availability for you to find a group and start role playing. Mm-hmm. You can go on to things like Fantasy Grounds, Roll20. There's a couple other ones, like their names escape me at the moment. But Fantasy Grounds and Roll20 are the two big ones. Roll20 is free.
Yeah, you don't have to pay for it.
You go on there, you can go into looking for groups, look for people that have games, you apply. Now, like anything in life, you got to kiss some frogs before you can find a prince. It might be hard to find the right.
There's a frog kissing role playing game. I bet you that.
Actually, there is.
I'm not surprised.
But there's a fairy tale role playing game. But you can go into these virtual places, and there's places that advertise on. You want to just play because you don't need anything fancy like a Roll20 or a Fantasy Grounds. A lot of people just do it in Google Hangouts and stuff. And you can go on to Facebook and you can find tons of groups of people of looking for other people to role play. The internet and the virtual tabletops have made it easy. Back in the day when you were gaming, you had to go down to the hobby store if your friends weren't role playing and look at people who posted up signs with the little tear things off with a phone number trying to put together groups. Well, now people can connect all over the place. Meetups, go on to Meetup. There's absolutely a ton of role playing stuff on Meetups,
A
and
lot of it's
specific for your
Pathfinder, though,
towns.
I found.
Well, there's D&D too. You just got to know how to type in the right stuff. So that's all right.
I can't. Yeah, I actually, one of my issues is I cannot physically type the characters D ampersand D.
Yeah, it's the ampersand that throws you off.
Throws it
Doesn't it?
off. I
Yeah,
just
it's
keep I
over.
just keep typing dad, and then I get a whole other type of meetup.
That's true. You might see me on one of those. Just say it.
So anyway, there's a lot of different games you can play, a lot of different ways you can play it,
Mm-hmm.
or you can just sit back and watch us play two different types of rule sets: Dungeons and Dragons 5e on Tuesday nights here on Wicked Studios LLC Twitch channel, and also on the YouTube / Mr. Adam PL channel, as well as on Wednesday nights, also at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Tales of a Savage Land, a Savage Worlds RPG system.
That's true. Very true. And we've got other things in the mix. I can't say it right now, but there's two other possible
Oh,
games going to be coming.
yeah.
Not saying anything else right now
All right. No
because
one's
I don't
watching
want to
this
be a
but
liar.
no one's watching this but me anyway. All right, for Will DM, I am Adam, and we will see you at the hobby store virtually.
Mm.
Shut up, nerd.